Did you know, over the years, enterprises have achieved 65% of higher project savings by adhering to Six Sigma methodology? Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on leading the way in Six Sigma. My name is Zach John, and I will be your host for today's session. A brief introduction about us. Inventors Learning is a leading training and certification organization providing globally recognized certification courses such as Lean Six Sigma, ITIL, PMP, Prince2, CAPM, PMI-ACP, DevOps, COVID-5, cloud computing, big data, and more. Thousands of professionals worldwide have been trained and certified by Inventors Learning for some of the leading Fortune 1000 companies and government organizations across 40 plus countries since 2015. Inventors Learning also hosts webinars on some fascinating topics across various industry verticals, so follow us on LinkedIn and other social media platforms to stay regularly updated on our upcoming webinars. Today's webinar will be presented by Craig M. Hoel. He's a Six Sigma Master Black Belt expert with 30 plus years of experience. He was a Boeing certified Six Sigma Black Belt instructor and training material lead and has retired since 2014. He has worked on many patented and industry best practices in the form of geometry assurance and FA-18 landing gear and aircraft program respectively for the US Navy. He was also part of Missiles Division and became the reliability team leader for the JDAM, a Joint Direct Attack Munition program, improving the reliability and reducing the military customer warranty service experience. With over 30 plus years of experience, Craig has a vast knowledge of Six Sigma implementation and how to lead critical Six Sigma projects and develop training programs for leaders, project or product managers, and team members. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the questions panel, which is on the right side of the screen, and I will bring them up at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties with your connection, feel free to write those on the chat tab. You can also download the handouts from today's session in the handouts tab. So if you do not see that, click on the view menu at the top of the right navigation pane, then make sure the handouts is checked. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Craig to take this webinar session forward. Over to you, Craig.
Okay, excellent. I'll just get through some of this. So we're going to talk about leading Six Sigma for the next 45 minutes or so. And what I want to do is to make sure that everyone gets a good understanding of how leading a Six Sigma project is really a primary need when you're doing projects to begin with. So, and I'll mention lean or lean methods occasionally in this because they go hand in hand and can improve the performance of your organization by both eliminating waste and reducing variation. So it'll be essential to understand that as a leader, your Six Sigma commitment is really understanding what it is and what deliverable value you expect from conducting Six Sigma efforts within your organizations. So we're going to look at really the whole process of selecting, chartering, and planning, Lean and Six Sigma projects so that the most significant and challenging problems can be really worked first. So in committing that necessary and resources for process and or product improvements that really will support the overall performance of your organization and delivering that expected value that you have. So leadership is really a primary focal in this presentation, and also the understanding of what really is Six Sigma. And so the cause and effect problems in complex systems are not closely related in time and space. So attempting to resolve these problems without the use of a system approach is ineffective. And that's basically from Peter Senge in his book, The Fifth Discipline, which is a good read for leaders to understand the underlying motivations of really conducting any process, product, improvement project within their organization. I'd highly recommend it. So some of the core competencies are getting that detailed expectation, the knowledge and problem focus, and understanding that projects are really essential to have their scope and scale defined so that you're not trying to fix everything all at once, and that there's an understandable business impact within the expectation as stated in a value deliverable for any effort. So lean competencies with that Six Sigma integration. And I'm going to get a little bit more into what really does that mean. Basically, there's a lot of tools out there that can be applied to processes. Here's a collection of several, and they actually all work together. Many people have done value stream mapping within their processes and product lines to understand what that problem or process flow is and where problems may exist in that. They may do some modeling with production preparation processes called the 3P and identify where bottlenecks are occurring in their process value stream. And can they get a really good look at, is it because of a problem? Is it because of a constraint? Or do they just have way too much process to process, unit to unit variation that ends up costing them time and or expense? So a lot of these all can work together with a Six Sigma initiative. And decisions should be based on data that comes from those processes and have some knowledge of what that impact is if you're able to identify those root causes. And so there's a big caution. A lot of people will say, okay, let's go do a project, and they have that ready, fire, aim mentality, like they're ready to go, and they want to get started, and they may be pointing in the wrong direction. So taking actions without, really fully understanding the problem will typically cause further problems. Essentially, you're tampering with a process that really has undiscoverable causes that are affecting it. So there's a big caution right there. I've always emphasized that every project before it starts should have a basic element of financial analysis tagged to it to assure that improvements can be expressed in terms of actual cost savings or cost avoidance, or maybe it's a new revenue stream and an opportunity for the company. The bottom line becomes the financial analysis is an integral part of each Six Sigma project because it defines that expectation. It's where the meaningful value is determined. And that can become the deliverable and sets the expectation that, can we achieve that? Will this project really focus on those meaningful things that become that project deliverable? Will everybody understand it? Will everybody buy into it? It all becomes part of the leadership mode that is essential before launching a project. Historically, a lot of people believe that, Six Sigma is really only relevant to manufacturing, but no, it is used to significantly improve processes throughout the business, including office processes, management, finance, factory, transportation, supplier coordination. And a lot of these things can be not only within a business unit itself, but can be through multiple divisions or even on a global scale. So looking at each one of the processes and how they interlink with one another will give you an idea saying, well, you know what? Sometimes a process that's occurring in one locale is affecting a process similar in another locale. So a lot of times it can be related to many interacting processes within the business. So Six Sigma is all of these things. It's a targeted and business-driven, customer-based, fact and data approach to process improvement and reducing costs, increasing process, and affecting, in a positive way, your overall customer satisfaction. It's a structured methodology, a set of tools for improving processes and increasing capacity through problem solving and root cause analysis, variation reduction, developing new processes or improving existing processes. Change is inevitable. Everything over time will decay to some point in its ability to produce uniform results. And it either becomes waste within a process or excessive amounts of variation. So Six Sigma is also a part of lean in eliminating waste. It's a process improvement methodology used to identify those critical issues, significant ones, and find their root causes and develop and or implement preventative solutions within those processes. So a basic concept of Sigma. It's a measure of variation measured from data that is collected from a process. It refers to the standard deviation of that process, that area under the distribution curve of a process. And when we talk about Six Sigma, we'll get into a little bit about what actually is the significance of that. So using statistical analysis, the sigma value is a measure of quality. It also measures your process's capability. So if your process has too much variation, it may be hard to produce the output with the customer requirements or specifications, whether it's time, whether it's cost, whether it's inventory, whether it's sales orders or your filing and record systems. They typically would have low sigma values because of excess variation transaction to transaction. If you have moderate variation, most of the output may meet your customer requirements. And a lot of times those outliers, those events that are occurring in a process will have a kind of a middle value sigma of 3 to 5 sigma, which in a lot of people's mind is pretty good because they just accept the fact that, well, things happen in our process that we just react to. But perfection within a process is possible where you have very little transaction to transaction or piece to piece variation, and virtually all the output can meet the customer requirements and have high sigma value approaching or at a Six Sigma value. And it's important to realize that if everything can be measurably indistinguishable cycle to cycle within a process, then that process becomes not only robust, but it can be replicated in other areas of similar operation. So for some people's perspective, and it becomes really important to understand, how do you define quality, or how do you define what is expected as a process output? For a lot of people, it says, well, if you give me a specification that, delivery must be accomplished within a 10-day period, or a particular transaction must be conducted within so many minutes, or each part has to be measurably indistinguishable from another, then some people will go back and look at this and say, well, if it's within the specification, all the product is equally good. The moment a product is out of specifications, it's equally bad, whether it's out of specification to the lower or the upper spec. But all the while, there's an expectation that that target value is the nominal. That's the best case. And so just meeting those specs or requirements in some people's mind is sufficient. But you have to ask yourself, is that how our customer feels about what they are receiving? So to approach that understanding, we're going to use this method of Six Sigma, being a phased approach. Pretty standard throughout industry is that they call the DMAIC process, and it includes the define, measure, analyze, and improve control phases. This is where a little bit of the complexity, but the discipline of Six Sigma really occurs. And identify the customers, whether they're internal or external, what their priorities are, and what they've experienced as underlying problems. In measure, we really want to be able to determine how the process is performing. How is it meeting the goals? How is it currently measured? Are those measures adequate? Do we have adequate data from a process to determine whether or not we can predict outcomes? And analyze, we will take that data, identify the most important causes or sources of defects or changes or variation that's occurring in a process in order to look for the best possible solutions, and then improve, test, and or apply to remove those causes of defects or variation, and see if we can then generate a more uniform output of our process. And then in control, how do you keep it? How do you keep those changes embedded in the process? What is your discipline for documenting permanent changes within a process so that they become the process? Not let's try it, but now this is not only the process, but it's also the process that we want to replicate in a similar way within other processes. So basically, Six Sigma makes use of those facts and data to identify root causes, the significant root causes of defects and variation, and permanently resolve what has been experienced as chronic problems. So how do you make this happen? So within a leadership team, we're going to take a look at those roles and responsibilities and focus on the business and the customer. What is the strategic direction that the company wants to go, or that we want a process to perform in? Establish those priorities within that business unit or that process group or within that team, and ensure that we have top to bottom organizational support for applying Six Sigma methods within our processes. Because without it, it'll just be another possibly viewed as quality initiative that can be ignored. And after a time, the next, thought process will enter the picture, but things will tend to remain the same. Visibility becomes also important to review progress on those key metrics that have been identified to indicate how a process is performing, and to identify where improvement opportunities may be, and recognize and communicate those efforts and expectations. And know that you want to share and replicate improvements across multiple business units and or processes within a single business unit. So that leader focuses on the Six Sigma program and people by, and this is real important, their involvement to identify what those business goals are and how they should be addressed with Six Sigma. Communicate the Six Sigma methods, which will require additional training so that people understand that each one of these steps in the DMAIC process of Six Sigma requires some education and learning and people to understand, oh, this is how it's done. And this is the discipline we're going to follow. And those leaders have to participate on leadership teams and bring in the people that have the ability to know the process, have experienced the process, and actually has some deep invested interest in how the process is performing. They will also assist and initiate and participate in those specific projects that are selected to show that involvement and interest, and participate in those project reviews to set those deliverable expectations. There's nothing like having your leader in front of you to understand that we're serious about these activities. And we do have an expectation that improvements will follow. But then also be there and be visible to support progress and support team recommendations for change and improvements or modifications to existing processes. All of that becomes very important for that leader to be visible for all the practitioners and recognize people and teams for their effort. After all, recognition is what babies cry for and grown men die for. So know that these are important and that visibility makes a difference. And every practitioner who becomes involved in Six Sigma is a supporter and a leader. So those project sponsors, and by that, a project sponsor is a person who is involved in the process on a day-to-day basis and is really has that responsibility for process performance on the project deliverables and its success. So determine which elements of the process to improve, which problems to resolve. Identify key process stakeholders, those who are the users or are actively involved in the process itself, and link the project teams to those business goals and objectives that the leader has outlined. So you have to have that association. You have to show that what I do will make a difference. And you answer a fundamental question. What's in it for me, for those people involved in executing the process? Will their job be more straightforward? Will they have less rework or recycles efforts in their process? And collaborate with that project team leader and stakeholders and Six Sigma coordinator. And by a coordinator, I mean somebody who is helping the team understand that discipline of each one of those DMAIC phases. So that person would be specifically trained. Some people would say, oh, it's probably a green belt or a black belt in Six Sigma to make sure that the team stays on track. But that coordinator will help keep that visibility to define the value deliverable and make sure that the team stays within the scope of the project. Scope being, we don't want to solve world hunger in this project, but we would like to get our tact time or the time that the process is executed to a more manageable state. Also, those sponsors have to identify the needed resources, those people to be involved in the process and or remove any barriers that will resist change. Sometimes that's a very difficult step because naturally people resist change because they're not used to it. They're used to their comfort zone within a process. But also be there, be ready to review progress in a timely manner, all incremental process changes that are made. And that's an important point as well. Many times, project teams find little changes and say, well, that would be nice to have. But sometimes it's those incremental changes that accumulate within a process to meet that overall deliverable value. So those project sponsors should absolutely implement incremental changes that can make a significant difference. But then again, also celebrate those successes just as well. Incrementally saying, hey, we found something, it's making a difference, let's find some more. And compliment and really celebrate with the teams on those incremental changes. So within the roles, who should be that process project sponsor or leader? Essentially, it has to be the person with the authority to approve and implement those teams' incremental changes in final deliverable value and the solutions that are made. The person that owns the process source of the problem. But understand that sometimes you just have to be willing to collaborate with various integrated or interacting processes that are outside of the specific team working a project. Maybe necessary to change a companion process that are the source of effect that are affecting the process. Everyone knows that if you get something within a process that is incomplete or the quality of that item going through the process is inadequate for the next steps in a process, then the upstream process might have to be examined as that source contributor. Be willing to collaborate with those within the process stream. So these methods in deployment must be tied and continually reminded or brought back to the fore that to the business value, those driven goals and objectives or opportunities, and also the risks that are identified. You know, not everything happens for change without some associated risk. And understand that time and resources have to be allocated to work process improvement projects. Some projects, because of the scope of the project, will take longer than others. But ideally, it'd be nice to get things completed in a timely way. And I think, in my experience, it's been that people recognizing those incremental gains, it's important to have them as and recognize them for the accomplishments that they've made. And those selected projects are also an investment. Sometimes that initial cost, the time required, and the resources are the leverage for that future payback and expectation. So from a business perspective, you'd select proven performers within an organization to become black belts as part of becoming effective business leaders. Set the expectation that employees are to improve processes and reduce variation and waste and eliminate defects. And that leader needs to be that visible person who's leading by example and supporting change within the process. So Why is a focused improvement strategy needed? Well, if you look at how you're currently performing, study after study has shown that a lot of times there's up to from 25 to 50% of waste within a process that's affecting your overall total cost. So there is a danger of doing nothing and continuing as you're currently performing, because market forces and competition and things can drive down your overall revenue associated with a process. So if you do nothing, all of a sudden, well, it could eat up all of your profits or a significant portion of it. But by looking at waste that's caused by defects and variation, plus the cost of doing things right, well, you could increase your process profit by reducing waste and focusing on that as your potential state of improvement after a project has been completed. And also looking forward to a similar result if you're able to replicate that process. So waste is a result of variation, rework, defects, and non-value added efforts, all of which exist in every process. And variation exists in everything. So from this perspective, Junichi Taguchi developed a loss function diagram as it relates to losses due to variation. So when you look at the fundamental concept, any loss in quality is defined as a deviation or movement from the ideal, that target value, not a failure to perform to the specifications, but any movement away from goodness or that target imparts a cost to somebody, either within the process or to the customer. So high quality can only be achieved economically by being designed from the start, not by inspection and not by screening product or steps in the process. So more variation will add more cost to the user or customer. So modifying a product for acceptance, maybe delivering or providing misunderstandings or bad or incomplete data or information, or researching data that could have been provided within the process itself. Or there's ambiguity or misalignment of product to process. But any deviation from the ideal imparts a cost or loss to somebody associated with the process output. So this next section has to do, well, how do you get started? What do you really do? Talked about a leader being visible, about getting the right people and the roles and responsibilities, and understand that involvement is critical. So project selection. So here's a statement that was made by Peter Panday, and they were the authors of another book that I would recommend, the authors of The Six Sigma Way. And essentially they conducted this informal poll of colleagues who have been involved in Six Sigma and other process improvement initiatives, and found that unanticipated consensus. Each person identified project selection as the most critical, most commonly mishandled activity in launching Six Sigma. And from my personal experience, I saw some very large projects initiated that died. I mean, they said, well, the problems are too big to solve, or we want to solve the problems, but we have all these obstacles. And a lot of times it really boiled down to the project was not properly identified or scoped. In other words, put boundaries. We are trying to affect this effort of the project. So from my perspective, it's absolutely true, is that project selection becomes a critical part of the success of any Six Sigma effort. And realize that the goal is to identify and work the best projects. And yes, the 80-20 rule is absolutely in effect. Those projects that can best deliver results are those 20%ers that affect 80% of the problem. And so knowing that and being quite specific about it supporting the business and organizational goals becomes really important. And then who cares? Who cares enough to drive it to completion? Why do they care? Are they supporting those business goals and objectives? Do they have the role, the proper role or authority and accountability for their process and their involvement in the process? Do they understand the potential of that improvement and its return on investment? We can have a multiple return on investment for many projects. I've seen projects that were costing maybe 5 to 8 weeks to implement that delivered complete manufacturing days in value to the process. It was a 10 to 50 to 1 payback, which is extraordinary. If you get a 5 to 10 payback, it's pretty normal. But business level projects focus on those strategic goals and objectives. Operations level projects focus on important technical or operational problems that have a link to our strategic goals and objections. So you look at, what are we doing in our operations? How well do we know our processes, that we're able to gain a focus on where to best apply our efforts? Becomes absolutely critical to know that, yeah, we can set the expectation for a deliverable value because we know where we're capable, where the process is performing, and where it's not. So the significance is, and this is related to scoping, is that, yeah, we would really like to make sure that we're visible to our completion time. Well, how long will this take? Because if you improperly select it, that's one of the things. People get bored with it. They just will not stick and stay with the improvement initiative that's not making progress. And that's why that leadership visibility comes in, because they set and recurringly set the expectation. It's not a one-time thing. We're going to have frequent reviews, and we're going to look at those results, and are they realized and verified, or is there little or no payback? Good projects keep people enthused. So if their morale is high, they will continue to pursue those defects or those significant items that they want to change. If they feel that they're not making headway, they'll kind of get disheartened and they'll give up. They won't have that high motivation. They won't be looking for the next one. We made some winners here. Let's do it again. Let's do it on this other part of the process. Or let's look at the collaborative process that we've been working with earlier. Maybe they can follow this and do it within their process. So the significance of project selection can affect teams' ability to perform in more ways than I could even tell you. So there are some ingredients of Six Sigma projects, good Six Sigma projects. And you have to say, well, there's a gap between the current and needed performance. Ask, is there a problem or an opportunity? The cause of the problem is clearly understood. Is the cause known? Because many times, if they know a cause straight up front that's affecting a process, but it still remains unresolved, sometimes the easiest thing you can do is fix that one thing. Oftentimes, you don't even need data. It's so blatantly obvious that you can go just do it. And the solution is unknown or not apparent. Is the solution predetermined or obvious? Very few times, if you don't know the cause, you cannot implement any kind of solution that will affect the process because they're not obvious. So if you answer yes to the first one, yeah, there's a problem, but you answer no to the following two, if the problem is not clearly understood or the causes are not known, then you probably have a qualified Six Sigma project that may have data already present. You may want to put your resources there. So prioritizing projects becomes also critical. Many times we look at maybe 2 or 3 projects within a process. So we have to really be judicious in looking at, well, which one has that bottom line impact? Which one is really supporting their organizational strategy for performance or growth? Which ones have that customer focus on either the next user or the ultimate customer in the output of the process? Is it a critical process? Will it be able to take and do push leveraging? In other words, take the results of its process and apply it to other similar processes. Is there complexity in the process? Is there a potential for simplifying it? Is it a source of where most of our resources are used? Are there other intangible impacts? Like we want to have a better quality rating from our customer. Also comes to, for our leaders, what's causing them the most stress about process performance? Maybe it is your largest source of rework or process delay. So authorizing the process, you assign a green belt or black belt team leader and clearly provide and bound who's going to make it happen. Hold the sponsor and Six Sigma practitioner accountable for project progress and or success. Keep it visible. Resource the team. Make sure they have adequate people and funding to keep things going. This is an eye test, I know. It's one that I'd used in the past, but essentially you're looking at a way of ranking each process based on its deliverables and giving a point value, whether there's a value for the deliverable aligned with your business goals or as a definable relationship to the business or department performance goals, that value benefit to all external customers. Is existing data there? Can other business units or groups or processes benefit? And the project can be completed in a timely manner. And what is the investment level of people, capital, and opportunity available? And how much will the potential process, product, or improvement change or impact? And you put values on each one of those and come up with a ranking. And remember, I talked earlier about that 80-20 rule. You pick that 20% of the projects that affect 80% of your business. Those are the right ones to work. And this would be just an example of what could help you get there. So looking at some of look for those gaps, are your business goals and objectives being met? Can they be improved upon? Gaps in your value stream, chronic issues of rework. If you have process data, where is it directing you? If you don't have process data, Six Sigma can identify what data should be obtained and how can you develop your capabilities. Remember, as a leader, only identify the potential projects. Never suggest a solution. One of the most critical things that can affect Six Sigma projects is working toward a solution that's already been suggested. So process owners and teams should be the ones responsible to develop possible solutions and actions to be taken or the tactics to be used for each of those definable actions. So in summary, a leadership team chooses the project areas or even the projects themselves. Sponsors base the project selection on solid criteria based on experience and process performance, data, or historical trends within a process. Launch reasonable number of projects, scope those engaged projects, and most importantly, stay engaged and review progress in a very timely and periodic way. So the leadership team identifies the need, the black belt, green belt refines the projects, the sponsor reviews and suggests changes and reaches mutual agreement with the project team, and the charter transfers the projects or sponsors to the team and is updated as the project develops and key milestones that start a project. Every project should have within its scoping a time frame to look at how things are going, what are your deliverables doing. And I think for me, it's always been following the DMAIC methodology will lead you to timely results. So chartering becomes quite important. It documents the process or problem to study. It documents why it's important to the customers of the organization. It specifically states a project and organizational boundaries, that's scoping. What improvements and deliverables are the value expectation, and when to begin a project, and the timeline target completion date. That's the ideal performance. So you have to link things. That business why is a result of all the processes that go into the output. So you have to define that metric that's driven by project results, something in which leadership is measured or is measuring. The defect should be defined an unacceptable level of variance in that output. And the goal and objective should be absolutely qualified for improvement of that business output. Make sure it does not contain any preconceived improvement. It'd be nice to say all projects say, we want a 10% improvement, when only 3% is possible. So those project reviews are absolutely important. Forces people to do the big picture thinking. How are we doing overall? How are we doing incrementally? It gives you time to delve into those detail points and lets the selected reviewers give you feedback. How are you doing? What's the problem? Look at the whole logic of the team's work at each one of these reviews, and allows both the team and the reviewer to check their understandings before the team departs and when they continue work, because they got to know that that progress that they've made is known and it does support the overall goal of the project. And it provides that opportunity to address any barriers or problems or systems or issues that are impeding any improvement efforts that the team is experiencing. Bringing that leader right into the fore can help make sure that those issues are addressed. So the sponsors should be there, the team leaders, the person who initiated the projects to begin with, and the use of Six Sigma methods should be part of those reviews, as well as all of the team members who are participating. That Greenbelt Navigator lead or the coach and all key stakeholders. That's where you get that positive feedback. So a typical report out lasts only 15 minutes with 5 minutes for questions after. Questions from the audience are held till after the presentation. Each report phase usually will have a template of required information to be contained in that report out. In each one of these major areas, the defined measure, the analyze and improve control. And sponsors are expected to attend all report outs. And setting that within the overall timeline or milestone plan for the project becomes important, because people want to roll up to those target dates and present the results of their work. And I can't emphasize enough that recognition is important for everyone. This needs to be a positive and reinforced effort by our leadership. Recognition should reinforce those intrinsic sources of satisfaction and motivation. Even giving out a thank you card, a small souvenir related to project work, something that comes from the leadership of the company to show that, yeah, you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, or a company award, or a special lunch or dinner, incrementally, things that show that people are paying attention to what you're doing and that it's important to the direction of the company. So hopefully now you have a clear understanding of what Six Sigma is. You have seen that applying Six Sigma practices in your process improvement efforts will generate quantifiable improvement results. You understand that there is and has to be a stated deliverable value. And you've exposed the roles and responsibility of leaders and sponsors and leadership teams. You've learned how to select and charter projects and what to expect from them. So hopefully I've answered all of your expectations for what leadership is in Six Sigma. There's a lot more to go as far as developing green belts or black belts, and let me look at questions.
All right, so we are open for questions session now. So thank you, Craig, for this insightful presentation. And also, I have an important announcement to make. So before we head into the Q&A session, so Invensys Learning is running an exclusive offer for webinar attendees today, where you can avail up to 20% discount on Lean Six Sigma training. And all you have to do is click on the link, which is in the chat box. This offer is for a valid period only, and we will also be sending you the offer form to your email post-webinar. And if any of you are looking for any Lean Six Sigma on-site group training requests, please feel free to email us at corporate@invensyslearning.com. With that, we are now open for questions, and you can use the questions tab on the right navigation panel to type in your questions. If you would like to ask a question out loud, there is also a drop-down box near the questions text box where you can ask a question and we can unmute your line so you can ask the question directly. So if you would like to ask the question directly, there's a palm-shaped icon on the attendees tab, so you can just click on that so that I can unmute your lines and you can ask the question directly to Craig. All right, Craig, do you see some questions on the question tab?
Impacts or changes due to more adoption of agile methodology. And I would have to say that, yes, I've worked with organizations that are using what I would call an agile lean approach to processes. My experience was in programming systems where we use an agile lean approach to identify and improve program releases, incremental program releases, and testing. And in that, we wanted to track with Six Sigma the improvements in overall cycle time and number of bugs that were developed in incremental program releases associated with Agile Lean.
Do you see another question on the questions tab? So there's a question from John. So he has asked if you would be able to give a scenario where Six Sigma would be relevant to a startup. So he's explained it more as few opportunities for process improvement since processes are largely being set up.
My response would be yes. The use of Six Sigma can be used by comparing in a benchmarking way similar processes within industry and taking a look at what their developed or known process capabilities were to similar processes that a person would involve in their process. And by benchmarking, I'm saying, okay, let's do a study of best practices in industry to determine what is the necessary capability to have within your processes in order to be competitive within that business area. So a lot of people historically have gone to and benchmark big companies like Boeing, Lockheed, Toyota, several of the car manufacturers, and looking at similar processes that their business may be in the future supporting, like a parts manufacturer or a programming support for systems. So my point would be if Six Sigma can help you better understand the needed or necessary process capability in order to be competitive in a startup business.
All right. Are there any more questions? So you can use the questions tab, or there's also a raise hand option, so I can unmute your lines and you can ask a question directly. Right. So we have another question. So regarding impacts or any changes due to more adoption of agile methodology, was that answered?
Yeah, I answered that one first. Regrettably, I kind of put it in, talked about agile and agile lean, and how you know, and that's my understanding of the use of agile and associated with Six Sigma. As I showed earlier in the presentation, there's many tools that are used in different processes that are very operate very symbiotically with Six Sigma methods. There's a very direct association. One is about taking a look at a process and eliminating waste, and another would be looking at a process to look at reducing measured and or known variation, or being able to separate common causes in a process, the things that normally would happen that are really sources of variation, and how to look at controlling them. And then finally, looking at, can we, with Six Sigma methods, identify special causes, those unusual events that happen unexpectedly that need to be prevented in a process. And Six Sigma can help you find and look at preventing those special causes from occurring.
All right, quick. So I don't see any more questions coming up. And do you have anything to add on before we have a wrap up?
Well, I think the finality of my understanding of how important the role of leadership is in starting a Six Sigma program within your business is an absolute critical step. I've done several presentations to executive management, and I was absolutely surprised at how not only few businesses, but even within processes, there's little understanding of what their capability really is to meet either the specification or customer requirements, or knowledge that there's of what their suppliers' capability was in delivering products and or processes to them, they had no idea. And I always go back to your final output is always going to be the sum of all those prior capabilities affecting the process. Some people look at them as like, these are steps in the process. So if you can look back and saying, okay, there are 100 steps to finally reach our deliverable to our customer. What is the capability of all of those value-adding steps in your process? And I found that probably less than 5% within all industries really know what that capability is and how it affects your outcome. So there's a great opportunity out there for leadership to say, you know, I want to know. I want to know what is going to be affecting us. That's my final statement. And thank you, everybody, for
Thank you,
tuning
Craig.
in. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all for Thank you, Craig. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar, and thank you, Craig, for conducting today's webinar session. And I look forward to hosting you again soon, and have a wonderful day ahead.
All right. Thank you very much.